On Viking longships, sleep was a battle against the cold. With no cabins, no insulation, and waves crashing over the deck, crews faced nights of freezing rain and relentless winds. Falling asleep unprotected meant waking up shivering, or not waking up at all. Viking ships offered no cabins, no warm beds, only open decks, where crews endured weeks of bone-numbing cold and waves crashing over the sides without warning. Yet somehow, Vikings turned these suicide vessels into conquest machines that carried them from Greenland to North America. The truth about how Vikings slept at sea reveals an engineering marvel built from desperation, where every material, every inch of space, and every human body became part of an integrated system designed to cheat death in the North Atlantic. Viking longships were suicide vessels masquerading as conquest machines. No cabins, no shelter, no protection from the elements whatsoever. Just an open deck where 60 warriors lived, ate, slept, and worked, while exposed to everything the North Atlantic could throw at them. When modern archaeologists first studied these ships, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The complete absence of any covered space meant that if it rained, and it rains constantly in northwestern Europe, you got wet. If waves broke over the low sides, you got soaked. If the temperature dropped, you had nowhere to escape the cold. One curator from Denmark's Viking ship museum, who actually crossed the North Sea in a reconstructed longship, described the experience in 2 words: cold and wet. The genius of Viking ships lay not in their comforts, but in their absence. Every missing shelter, every exposed plank forced crews to invent new ways to survive. Every design choice prioritized speed, maneuverability, and shallow draft over human comfort. The open design meant maximum rowing efficiency when winds failed. The low profile reduced wind resistance during storms. The lack of superstructure kept the ships light enough to be carried overland between waterways. But this engineering advantage created a survival crisis that should have killed everyone aboard. Vikings had to solve an impossible equation. How do you stay alive in a vessel designed to expose you to the very elements you're trying to conquer? The answer turned these death traps into the most successful exploration vehicles in medieval history. But the cost was brutal. Pirates discovered that the cannons didn't care what you stuffed down their barrels as long as it fit. They began creating langrage, canvas bags filled with whatever sharp, twisted metal they could scavenge. Nails, broken glass, iron scraps, chain links, anything that could punch through human flesh got crammed into makeshift ammunition. The evidence uncovered on Queen Anne's Revenge demonstrates a methodical approach, not mere desperation. When researchers pulled cannons from the wreck, they found them still loaded with conglomerations of lead shot mixed with nails, glass fragments, and iron spikes. These weren't emergency measures. Blackbeard's crew had deliberately prepared their most brutal ammunition and kept it ready for the next encounter. When langrage fired, the canvas bag disintegrated inside the cannon barrel, sending a cloud of spinning metal fragments in all directions. The effect resembled a massive shotgun blast, but with jagged pieces of iron instead of round pellets. The wounds were horrific. Unlike clean punctures from musket balls, langrage created ragged tears that were nearly impossible to treat at sea. Ship surgeons couldn't extract dozens of glass shards and twisted nails from a wounded man without killing him in the process. Pirates didn't just use whatever metal they found lying around, they actively sought out the most damaging materials. Broken glass created wounds that wouldn't heal properly. Bent nails caught in muscle and bone. Chain links had enough weight to break limbs on impact. Some crews even melted down captured silverware, creating custom projectiles that would fragment on impact. The psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. Survivors of language attacks spread stories about the horrific wounds they'd witnessed. merchant crews began surrendering at the first sight of pirate flags, knowing that resistance meant facing weapons. The sleeping bag that saved Viking civilization looked like a waterproof body bag designed for 2 corpses. The Húdfat, literally hide sack, was a sheepskin sleeping bag stitched together along the sides with room for 2 full-grown warriors who had to share body heat to survive the night. Picture this: 2 battle-hardened Vikings, men who'd rather die than show weakness, forced to curl up together like children afraid of the dark. Their fear was never the darkness, it was the creeping grip of hypothermia. The construction was ingenious in its simplicity. Outer layer, heavy linen treated with fish oil and tar for waterproofing. Middle layer, thick wool batting for insulation. Inner layer, sheepskin with the fur intact, positioned to trap warm air against human skin. The entire assembly was sewn together with sinew and sealed with wooden buttons and leather loops to prevent heat loss through gaps. But the most crucial feature was the 2-person capacity. Human bodies generate heat constantly, about the same as a 100-watt light bulb. 2 bodies pressed together in an insulated container could maintain core temperature even when outside air dropped to lethal levels. Vikings had turned basic thermodynamics into a survival strategy that allowed them to sleep while crossing the most dangerous waters in medieval Europe. For smaller crews on merchant vessels, Vikings used an alternative called the soraya, a wool blanket woven with raw wool tied to one side to mimic sheepskin texture. The soraya could get wet and still insulate, and it dried faster than hide bags. But it took up more storage space, so it appeared mainly on cargo ships with fewer men aboard. Archaeological evidence from Birka in Sweden and Iceland confirms these sleeping systems were standard equipment. 2 intact soraya blankets, dating to the 10th to 12th centuries, show wear patterns consistent with regular shipboard use. The Húdfat remains found in ship burials, show they weren't symbols of ceremony, but the hard-used gear that kept Vikings alive through months at sea. When individual survival gear failed, Vikings fell back on the most primitive and effective heating system available: each other. Group huddling turned human bodies into a shared furnace, using biology itself as life support technology. The science was brutal and simple. Human bodies produce heat through metabolic processes, radiating warmth in all directions. When Vikings clustered together during the worst conditions, they created pockets of higher temperature that could raise ambient air by crucial degrees. Studies of cold weather survival show that group huddling can increase survival time by hours or even days when individual resources are exhausted. Vikings perfected this technique through necessity. During storms or extreme cold snaps, entire crews would gather in the center of the ship, pressing together under whatever covering they could find. Larger men were positioned on the outside to shield smaller crew members from wind. The huddle rotated periodically, so everyone got time in the warmer center. The psychological cost was enormous. These were warriors who valued personal space and individual strength above almost everything else. Forced intimacy violated every social norm they lived by on land. But at sea, survival trumped dignity. Pride became a luxury they couldn't afford when temperatures dropped to killing levels. Archaeological evidence suggests Vikings developed specific protocols for shared warmth. Saga accounts describe crew members taking turns in different positions within huddles. The strongest men took shifts on the windward side, while the weakest were kept in the protected center. Even in extremis, Vikings maintained military discipline in their survival tactics. This human heating system had limits. Extended exposure could still kill entire crews despite their best efforts. But group huddling bought them time. Enough time for weather to change, for land to appear, or for other survival measures to take effect. In the mathematics of medieval survival, a few extra hours often meant the difference between death and making it home alive. When the Húdfat wasn't enough and human heaters failed, Vikings stripped their ships for parts and built shelter from whatever they could find. Desperation turned every rope, sail, and oar into potential life-saving equipment. The most common emergency shelter used the ship's sail. When pulled ashore for the night, crews could lower the large woolen sail and stretch it across the ship from gunwale to gunwale, creating a crude tent. Archaeological evidence from ship burials shows tent poles and rigging specifically designed for this purpose. The Oseberg burial included 2 complete tent setups with carved wooden poles and fabric remnants that matched sail construction. At sea, when going ashore wasn't possible, Vikings created sleeping platforms using oars laid across the rowing benches. This got bodies off the wet deck and above the cold air that settled in the bilge. The oar platform system appears in multiple saga accounts, and modern reconstructions have proven its effectiveness at reducing heat loss through ground contact. For insulation, crews used whatever organic material they could find. Straw and hay, stuffed between deck planks, created barriers against cold air seepage. These materials were readily available at departure ports and could be replaced during coastal stops. More importantly, they absorbed moisture while maintaining insulating properties, crucial for survival in the damp conditions that dominated North Atlantic voyages. Emergency situations called for more extreme measures. Saga accounts describe crews burning ship components for warmth when survival was at stake. Spare oars, deck planking, and even parts of the ship's structure became fuel when hypothermia threatened. Vikings calculated that a damaged ship was better than a crew of frozen corpses. The most sophisticated emergency shelter was the untold, a tent system specifically designed for shipboard use. Historical sources describe these as cloth stretched over a ridgepole running down the ship's centerline, with the fabric extending to both sides to create a waterproof canopy. Skaldic poetry mentions ships sailing with untold raised, proving these weren't just harbour shelters but working weather protection. Viking survival depended on exploiting the hidden properties of seemingly ordinary materials. Wool, animal fat, and pine tar became high-tech survival gear when Viking ingenuity unlocked their potential for keeping humans alive in lethal conditions. Wool was the miracle fibre that made Viking sea travel possible. The secret lay in its structure, crimped fibres that trapped air pockets even when wet. Unlike modern synthetic materials, wool retained insulating properties when soaked with seawater. The natural lanolin coating on wool fibres repelled moisture and preserved the air spaces that provided thermal protection. Vikings discovered that tightly woven wool could be made nearly waterproof through treatment with animal fats. Sheep tallow, fish oil, and seal blubber were worked into fabric to create primitive oilcloth that shed water while maintaining breathability. This treated wool formed the outer layer of Húdfat sleeping bags and emergency cloaks that could keep Vikings dry during multi-day storms. Pine tar provided waterproofing that went beyond simple water resistance. This resinous substance, extracted from pine trees through controlled burning, created a flexible coating that moved with fabric and wood without cracking. Applied to ship seams, clothing, and sleeping gear, pine tar formed barriers that lasted for months of hard use. The tar also had antimicrobial properties that prevented rot in organic materials exposed to constant moisture. Animal fats served multiple survival functions. Beyond waterproofing, these fats provided concentrated calories that Vikings could consume for internal heat generation. A handful of rendered fat contained enough energy to fuel human metabolism for hours. Rubbed on exposed skin, animal fats created protective barriers against windburn and frostbite. The combination of these materials created survival systems that outperformed their individual components. Wool, treated with animal fat and sealed with pine tar, became nearly indestructible protection against elements that regularly killed unprepared travelers. Archaeological analysis of preserved Viking textiles shows sophisticated layering techniques that maximize the protective properties of each material. Modern testing has proven the effectiveness of Viking material science. Reconstructed Húdfat sleeping bags using period-accurate materials maintain internal temperatures above survival thresholds, even in conditions that would kill unprotected humans. The Vikings had discovered through trial and error what modern materials science explains through molecular analysis. The right combination of natural materials could create survival gear superior to anything available until the Industrial Age. The proof of Viking survival engineering lies scattered across the North Atlantic. Settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and North America that exist only because Vikings solved the impossible problem of staying alive in ships designed to kill them. Every Viking settlement beyond Scandinavia represents successful voyages made in open boats across some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. The colonies in Iceland required regular supply runs across 600 miles of North Atlantic waters. Greenland settlements needed consistent contact with Iceland and Norway across even longer distances. The North American settlements at Lawns or Meadows prove Vikings could survive weeks-long voyages across completely unknown waters. These achievements become staggering when you consider the conditions. Viking Age climate data shows colder temperatures than today, with more severe storms and longer periods of sea ice. Historical accounts describe voyages lasting months, with crews exposed to elements that modern survival experts consider unsurvivable without advanced gear. The integrated survival system that made this possible combined every element: ships designed to minimize cold exposure, sleeping gear engineered for shared warmth, improvised shelters built from available materials, and scientific understanding of how natural materials could protect human life. Remove any component and the system failed catastrophically. Archaeological evidence shows the system worked across centuries of use. Ship burials contain Húdfat and Soria in consistent designs, proving these weren't experimental gear, but refined technology perfected through generations of trial and error. The survival gear found in wealthy burials matches equipment in common graves, indicating these systems were standard across all levels of Viking society. But success came at a cost measured in human endurance. Modern recreations of Viking voyages show even experienced sailors struggle with the physical and psychological demands of weeks-long exposure to North Atlantic conditions. Historical accounts hint at the breaking points. Saga descriptions of crews driven mad by cold, expeditions that disappeared entirely, settlements abandoned when supply ships failed to arrive. The Vikings who colonized the North Atlantic endured as desperate survivors, using raw ingenuity to turn survival skills into the power of expansion. Their ships remained death traps, but Vikings had learned to turn those death traps into vehicles for conquest. The survival systems that kept them alive during impossible voyages enabled the Norse expansion that reshaped medieval Europe and reached the shores of North America centuries before Columbus. The most devastating pirate weapon lay beyond iron and gunpowder. It lived in fear. A story could spread farther than a cannonball, and the memory of shredded sails and broken bodies traveled faster than any ship. Crews didn't just surrender to cannon fire, they surrendered to reputation, to the terror of what might happen if they resisted. Archaeological evidence from wrecks like Queen Anne's Revenge shows how deliberate this was. Pirates experimented like engineers of terror, turning scrap metal, chains, and broken glass into weapons designed to shatter bodies and minds alike. Every improvised cannon shot struck more than wood and flesh. It struck the mind, leaving survivors to spread tales of horror at the next port. That legacy endures. Beneath the waves, some cannons still lie loaded, their language sealed in iron for centuries, silent reminders of how pirates turned desperation into innovation and fear into their deadliest weapon.